got 11 different countries represented in our Collaborative Leaders Huddle today. Very excited about that. Welcome, everyone. Let's get rolling. My name is Craig Ross, CEO of Harris Global. Of course, I'm joined by the incomparable, the one and only Sherilyn Jane. Sherilyn Jane, of course, is my co-host here, if you will. She's more than just a moderator. She's the one that, of course, makes all this run so smoothly and also engages your voice. Sherilyn, a few words?
Yes, hi everyone, and welcome to the Huddle. This is being recorded, as you heard. And if you have any questions for Sean or Craig, feel free to post those in the chat. If you want to remain anonymous, you can just send your question directly to me and I'll read it aloud on your behalf. But if you would like to take yourself off of mute and ask the question, just post it in chat for everyone to see, and I will go ahead and call on you.
Thank you, Sherilyn. And without a moment more, let's introduce our distinguished guests. You know, I've long thought, and those of you who I've had the privilege of interacting with before, you perhaps have heard me share this. I think one of the criteria, one of the requisites to being an effective collaborative leader is you've got to be a good human being. I mean, how many leaders, seriously, how many leaders would you raise your hand and say, you know, he or she's a great leader, but I can't stand being around them? We don't say that about the effective leaders. We typically say, I like being around that person. Well, our guest today, Sean Westcott, Senior Vice President of R&D for Europe at the PepsiCo company, is not only a dear friend, he's an exceptional human being. And you're going to get a chance to experience that as we move through this short time together. Sean, good morning. August 4th, you're calling in from Melbourne, Australia, an extraordinary effort. We do appreciate it. Would you say hello to our huddle this morning?
Yeah, hello. It's my first time joining this huddle, and I'm really pleased to be here. Looking forward to this discussion. And briefly, as Craig introduced, I work for PepsiCo. I work in the area of R&D, so I look after everything to do with innovation, our brand stewardship for our brands and businesses in Europe.
And beyond that, he's an amazing family man as well as an extraordinary road cyclist. Check out these photos. I must confess transparently, when I saw these, I was a tad bit jealous. I was wondering why I was sitting behind a desk while you're working out in the mountains. Sean, give us a glimpse. Where are we here in these photos?
So we're in France, just across the border from Switzerland. And if you're a fan of the Tour de France, you'd actually recognize this because I was riding one of the stages of the Tour de France over Col de la Colombière. So it's a hell of a ride. And I wouldn't call myself a great cyclist. I'm an enthusiastic cyclist. And I really do enjoy particularly riding mountain passes because it's just such a tremendous experience. And there's nowhere quite like France to ride over a few mountains.
Sean, thanks for allowing us to share that personal glimpse. I've known you for several years. You, like so many leaders that are joining us today, are committed to doing big things. Those photos show it. And of course, your leadership demonstrates it, which brings us to our big question today. The question, of course, is, you know, how do we lead change in a post-COVID era? And obviously, you know, we perhaps could have chosen a different question post-COVID. Well, we're not quite there yet, but there certainly is a transition as people return to the office. Some do, some don't. It's a bit ambiguous right now for so many professionals. We're learning how to live with COVID, frankly, and it's been such a tragic experience for so many, our friends in India, others around the world. And yet we as leaders must continue to do what? Lead change. And so let's jump into our Collaborative Leaders Huddle and begin to answer this question. Sean, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, so maybe just a little bit of context. So I joined PepsiCo after a long stint with Nestle, and I actually joined them in February last year. So everyone knows what happened in March last year was that, so I spent only a few days in the office in my new company, and I've been working in this environment ever since, which has been a really interesting experience in terms of leading culture and leading change. And a couple of things I've learned around leading change during the time and working in this environment. The first one is it's just so important to lead with context. That's one of the things that we're really challenged with is we're not together naturally in the office where there's an organic, if you like, creation of context. And so it's so important to build that shared reality, and you have to, I think, quite consciously work to construct that and to cultivate it in this environment, because it just doesn't form as naturally as when we're working together in the office. So that's the first thing, leading with context. The second thing I would call reading the Zoom. So it's not reading the room anymore, it's reading the Zoom. And the reality is we're all working in these very different environments where we don't actually know what's on the other end. We were discussing the other day that for some of us, who may be deeper into our careers, we were in an environment where we had a nice, comfortable house, maybe a garden to walk around, maybe a pool. So even though we were locked down, we had quite a comfortable environment. But many of our younger associates who may be starting their career are in a room where their office is their bedroom. So we don't know what's on the other side of this keyhole. And we don't know what other people are experiencing. And we're actually all having very different experiences. Whereas when we're in the office together, that shared experience and building that shared reality is much different. So, how do you energize? How do you engage? How do you activate? And how do you sustain change when you're in this environment? So reading the Zoom and being really sensitive to what other people's experience is while you're actually working together, understand that everyone's experience is actually much more different than when you're in the office. And then the last one, I think, sorry.
No, go
and
ahead.
the last one is I think about us personally as leaders is what I found, and I don't know if everyone had the same experience, is your life becomes a series of vignettes, meetings stitched together, Zoom after Zoom. And the reality is, there's a book by Cal Newport called Deep Work, and he points to the fact that for us to really, as leaders, to think and actually really get into what we're thinking about, we need space and time to actually immerse ourselves and actually build some quality thinking. And that's, I think, the other aspect of leading change, which is how do we create that space to do that deep work, that deep thinking, which is actually going to help us shape the change. And I see that's been a big personal challenge. And we actually, at PepsiCo, we agreed there would be no meetings across the European sector on a Wednesday morning. And all assistants and planners were told that there were to be no meetings on a Wednesday morning. And we also created certain periods when different meetings could happen because we recognized we weren't doing enough thinking. And at the moment, we're experiencing extraordinary change, which requires us to actually process it and make sense of it.
Sean, I love these. So context, setting context, reading the Zoom, another phrase, a new phrase for us here. And then, of course, life is a series of vignettes. I want to drill down a little bit behind this idea of being intentional. One of the things that we're noticing in the organization's leaders we're serving is there's a differentiating capability, if you will. And it's the leaders who are intentional in doing the things that are working well. Whereas perhaps before, when we were in person under the same roof, we didn't have to be. What does it look like for you to be intentional on that first component of establishing context? Give us a glimpse of what that looks like.
Yeah, we've really worked on what we call responsive working practices, and other people may have experienced those. And if you like, there are a set of techniques that you use in an environment like this. So it's message sent, message received, right? If you want to build context, you can feel that, hey, I'm sitting here, I'm verbalizing what's really important here. But the question is the message sent also received by the group of people in the little boxes across the bottom of your screen? And so these responsive working techniques is being very conscious of doing things, for example, like rounds where you ask each person on the call to give them the space to contribute. And there's a number of these, and there's other, of these techniques, but we found that that's one of the things, if you want to lead with context, it's not enough to put it out there. You actually have to make sure it's landed as it passes through this Zoom world that we've got. And so I think being very intentional about the people that you're engaged with and actually making sure that people in the meeting have an opportunity to contribute and they don't get shut out is very important. So that's one of the areas of intentionality, that just hyper awareness of the people you're engaging with in this environment.
Sean, I appreciate that comment. I'll be transparent in response. I think there are a lot of folks probably in this network of collaborative leaders who've actually realized that as tragic as this COVID era is and what it's meant to humanity, it's also been an opportunity for us to do that, to become more conscious, to become more aware. And of course, behind that, it allows us to do things such as live our values, and be more intentional in those areas that are so important in our lives. Your answer resonates. I appreciate that. Sherilyn, I'm going to ask Sean one more question, then I'm going to go to our network and see what we have for questions coming in from folks. As a reminder, you can take yourself off mute in a moment, or after Sherilyn calls on you, or simply chat your question to Sherilyn and she'll read it for you. I'd like to come back to Sean with this idea. You mentioned the keyhole.
Yep.
We're leading from our homes. In a prior communication, you'd mentioned this. You said, Craig, I'm practicing leading through the keyhole. And it immediately created this image for me that seems so real. Tell us about that, what you've learned as it relates to leading through the keyhole.
Yeah, I think it came from the fact that, as I said, I joined PepsiCo and spent less than a month in the office and was just starting my induction, and then this crisis hit, and suddenly I've never met most of the people that report to me in person. I've done performance reviews with them. I've dealt with all of the personal things that come with a death in the family or whatever, and that's all been done through this environment that we're in now. And I realized that you take for granted when you've worked in an organization for a while that culture is something that's happened around you and it's a shared experience. I didn't have that shared experience with people. So I'm trying to build a winning culture and strengthen what's already a very strong culture at my organization. But it really did feel at times like you're trying to push things through that keyhole. Just that concept of this very small space where you've got so much as a leader that you want to engage the team on and explore and build. But it's all got to fit through a very small hole is what it felt like. And the other part, Craig, was when you look through a keyhole, you've got a very limited view of what's on the other side. And just experiences like, people's kids popping into meetings, or you hear a thump off the side of the screen and suddenly the person becomes a parent, no longer a colleague, and the immediate look, what's happened to my son? And realizing that what I was talking about with different experiences, that people are dealing with homeschooling or many other challenges in their life. But when you look through that keyhole, you also are looking into a different room and seeing a different side of your colleagues. And so all of these things, to me, relate strongly to culture. And if you want to drive change, the awareness of what you're seeing, but your point around intentionality is because you've got this limitation that you've got to work with and we've got to adapt to. And thinking about it that way made me conscious of, I can't take for granted all of the reflexes I had in my last organization. I have to build them, and I have to build them in a very different way. I've never built them before as a leader, working with the tools that were at hand at the time.
Tools that are in hand at the time, overwhelmingly, when we're out working with leaders, virtually or otherwise, and we hear this idea of, hey, we need to trust one another as an example of culture. Oftentimes we hear people say, well, if you just give people time, right? If we're going to go back to the office now and we'll have more time. And yet when we peel that onion back a little bit, if you will, and look a little bit deeper, what we're hearing overwhelmingly is people have 6, 7, 8 meetings a day, and they don't have the time to build those relationships we once were able to. And so I like this concept of leading through the keyhole. Even if I'm in the office, if I have 8 meetings a day, I've got this small moment in time through which I can create or accomplish or influence others in a way that, of course, leads to successful change. Collapsing that time, being intentional. Thank you, Sean. Sherilyn, do we have a question from our network of leaders?
Yes, we do. This one is going to be anonymous. The question is, how do you create alignment virtually?
All right. Okay. Let's get busy. Sean, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's been quite a challenge, hasn't it, to create and sustain alignment. I think that's comes back to the point I was making about leading with context, because I think that's really, really important, because you need to let people solve the problem. So, right, we're trying to create an environment where teams can be successful. And by really putting a lot of effort into leading with context, whether it's around your organization's strategy, whether it's around the principles, whether it's how what you're seeking to do will create value for you, for your stakeholders, I think that's so important. If you're trying to drive the alignment, that's often transactional. We're not aligned or whatever, but focusing on context and investing the time to make sure that everyone's building a shared understanding of the situation. I think that that's one of the most important things you can do to building alignment, because if you have good colleagues and who are skilled at their job, I think if you get the context right, then the alignment tends to come because you've built that shared understanding of what you're trying to achieve. And then alignment on the different aspects of it becomes much easier when you've built that context. But it is not as easy to achieve that same shared reality, working virtually. And I think we all anticipate continuing to work in some hybrid, part in the office, part work from home going future. So we really do have to make sure that we focus on that and really work hard to build that context so people can actually align to that.
Sean, I want to go back to your comment around that, you're looking through that keyhole and you can only see just a little bit. Well, if I put myself in the shoes of, let's say, even the team members at Verus Global, they too are looking back at me through a keyhole, aren't they?
Yeah.
And so I think the setting context gets really, really important. I'd like to recommend as well as a solution to the individual who asked that question, how do you create alignment? Sean, you said strategy, principles. We know for a fact, what does the research say? Only 19% CEOs were asked, what percentage, what was the question in the research? It was 19% of CEOs had the confidence that their employees could share, could articulate the organizational strategies, that they were clear on the organizational strategies. Only 19%. And so when I think about setting context, I think about being deliberate and actually asking those questions through that keyhole in that moment of time around what does success look like to you? Sean, you mentioned principles. Might we even ask, what are the principles to which we must execute or to which we must adhere as we execute this plan? Sean, I'm curious to know how that sits with you, and if it resonates, what additional questions do you ask to set the context and create that shared reality to drive alignment?
Yeah, I think one of the questions that, when I think like a lot of big companies is that, we've realized that, we have to sustain our license to operate as a company. It's not enough for us just to make money for our shareholders anymore. So, our impact on the communities that we operate in, how our farming practices, for example, are creating sustainable agriculture and so on. So to me, when I talk about principles and I talk about strategies, it's really working to help people understand what are we trying to achieve as a company beyond just generating profit and generating growth. And the reason that that's important is how we execute our strategies, which our strategies are executed by project teams who are we're empowering to go out and build, if you like, our business in the future. They need to make choices and they need to trade off and yes, they need to create value, but they need to create valuable in a sustainable way, because if we don't, we'll lose our license to operate. And the regulators and key NGOs have made that clear. They're going to put a lot of pressure on us to do that. And so that's one of the most important things that as a leader that we can do in terms of setting the context, is give project teams an understanding of what are the trade-offs they have to make as they drive forward.
Mm-hmm. Sean, as you shared that, I want to underscore something I think is really critical. In fact, this just happened last week. I was working with a leadership team. We were talking about execution. And I said, you know what, let's pause for a moment. Please write down some of the questions you asked to create a shared reality, drive alignment as it relates to executing. Overwhelmingly, I didn't do anything scientific, but it was nearly 100% of the questions were all the how questions. How will we? Who will we? When will we? Very, 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 very few questions were the questions that you just spoke to. what is the purpose of this? Even organizationally, what's the purpose of this? And of course, we know from research, what does success look like? The vision questions. What does it look like in terms of where we're going? And then that third question, of course, as we all know, tapping into motivations. Why is the accomplishment of this objective important to the organization, to our customers, and to us personally? I just want to remind us as collaborative leaders, those questions that speak to purpose, vision, and motivations absolutely increase alignment, accelerate execution. Sherilyn, let's go back to our network here. I see some chats coming in. They're coming in faster than I can read. Which question do you want to pull?
Yeah, Aaron, if you want to take yourself off of mute and ask your question, I think it's a great question.
Thank you so much. So it's really around the keyhole and that concept. And I think there's certain areas where I found that I think some certain strengths are kind of magnified when you look through the Zoom and what you can see. The people have let you in now to where you didn't see that side of them before too in the office. And so I didn't know, to me, it's helped build quicker strengths in certain areas. But I didn't know from your perspective too, across the organizations, culture-wise, there's ways to expand on that.
Yeah,
Aaron, thanks for speaking up. Sean, you're up.
yeah, that's a great question. I would say that I've learned a tremendous amount about my colleagues and my team as whole people, if you like, that I probably wouldn't have seen through the office through this environment. And it's one of the things that it's really taught us is, we can be much more flexible and adaptable with our work, and really respectful to each of our individual people. And as I was saying earlier, through this keyhole, you don't just see the person in the office, you also see them in the home, and you see all of the things that they're struggling with. And it's one of the things I've found remarkable is, as our teams have learned more about each other through what we see, people have become much more empathetic, much more tolerant, and much more supportive of each other, because they actually see each other, they see more of each other's lives, and they have a better understanding of where each person's at. People seem to come to meetings and be more open about where they're at as a person. I may not be a 10 out of 10 today, but I'm a 7, but I'm going to be the best 7 I can be today. And so I think that empathy has been really, you're right, it has been one of the upsides of this environment.
Yeah, well put. And Aaron, that's why I love these huddles, right? We get to leverage the wisdom of all. And you're reminding us, when you have a focus through that keyhole, you're going to see things amplified and the strengths. I encourage all of us, and I can do a better job of this as well. Transitions are a tremendous opportunity to amplify. And so when we return to the office, I think it's critical that we as leaders actually within project teams or direct reports actually say, hey, what did we develop as strengths working virtually that we want to reinforce and magnify now that we're back in person? And why is that? What will we do? What will we do to make that occur? There are countless other questions. What did we discover about one another in a virtual setting that we want to build upon as we return to the office? I think anytime there's a transition, it's incumbent upon us as collaborative leaders to facilitate that transition, to amplify the strengths you're talking about, Aaron. Nicely done. Sherilyn, let's hear from another member of our network.
Yeah, so Anthony, do you want to, you're off mute. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, thanks for this. This is super helpful. I want to appreciate just this sharing of resource. I think that's one of the things that this pause has brought us more than anything is just, we're sharing high level resources here on a Zoom call at 8 a.m. in Mountain Time. So I just want to kind of honor that, that this would not have happened had I not gone to some conference or something in some other state or country. So the question really is focused at, it seems to me, and I know I may be using old terminology, but it sounds to me as if you're kind of talking about a triple bottom line, right? Where profit, kind of the human, and then the kind of environment are being considered at PepsiCo. I wonder how you prioritize when tough decisions have to be made as a leader. How do you prioritize one over the other? What's your thinking around that? What's your kind of process?
Yeah, look, you're right. There's absolutely tensions and trade-offs. I think what we've done, Anthony, and it's if you work in Europe and you see what the European Union's doing with the Green Deal and their regulations, they're creating an interlocking set of regulations which connect everything from literally the health of the soil, the health of the environment, to the health of the individual. And in recognizing that, we saw that, you know, if we don't, if you like, take care of our license to operate, if we don't earn that license to operate, we're going to get shut out. So the first thing we did was we said, let's look at those costs which are, that we need to bear, if you like, to ensure that license to operate, and we're building them into our business, if you like, as a problem to solve. And what that does is, if you like, it's shifted the point of the tension. Not, start with why. Why do we need to do this? Well, we need to do this because we want to be a long-term company and all of that stuff. So therefore, we should understand, if you like, the environmental P&L of our company to an extent. And so what we've done is we've shifted where the tension is away from the trade-off of doing these things to where else in the organization do we have to make decisions which are actually going to unlock what we've already built into our organization. And it's had a really remarkable effect. What's happened is we've seen a big acceleration in those principle-based parts of our company, whether it's recycled PET and some of these other areas, regenerative agriculture. We're actually seeing those things really accelerate, and we're finding that, if you like, almost a leap of faith, that if we get those things right, they are going to start to self-fund themselves in the longer term. And the whole point is scaling that stuff. So in a way, we've taken this leap of faith and we're reframing how we think. And by doing that, we're shifting the point of tension and trade-off to a much more constructive place. We still have to make the trade-offs, but we've put them in a way, I think we found a way to get the trade-offs into the right place.
Sean, I appreciate how you say that, shifting the point of tension, because that's exactly what it is. So it's super helpful to hear that you phrase it that way, because it makes more sense to me. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, Anthony. Shifting the points of tension. And Sean, there is a recurring theme in your answers today around context, right? Around making connections for people, for employees, for teammates. Just wanted to underscore that as well. All right, nicely done, Anthony. Thank you for the brilliant question. Sherilyn, let's keep priming the pump here. We've got a fabulous network. What additional questions do we have?
Yeah, I do have one that's wants to remain anonymous, so I'll go ahead and read. The question is, Craig made a good point about 8 to 9 meetings a day, but I'm having a different experience with building relationships. So my question is, what are some ways to intentionally build relationships in virtual meetings? I find we were always just getting straight to business.
Oh, Sean, I've got a few thoughts on that, but I know you as well. You build relationships so masterfully. And of course, that's a huge part around bringing out the best in people. What are your thoughts first?
Yeah, look, I hear that. I hear what you're saying about getting straight down to business. Yeah, you've got the meetings stacked up, you've got things to achieve, so you want to get down to business. But I think I found that that's unproductive, because, again, starting each meeting with just engaging the other person at the other end, like looking through the keyhole, you don't know where they are today, you don't know what they've just come from, but you do know they've just come from maybe 4 meetings beforehand. So just starting the meeting, and we've really been intentional about this, is, how are you doing today? How are you feeling? And yeah, it does chew up time. Like I would say, if I have a 45-minute meeting, which is typical, the first 10 minutes is just purely on checking in with each other and understanding what's happening in the other person's life. Because I think if you don't respect that and you just blaze away with the business, there's a real chance you could blow the whole 45 minutes, because the other person just may not be receptive or may not be able to engage with what you're doing. So we found that having this, if you like, I don't know if you call it decompression at the start of the meeting, but just this opportunity to build the rapport, just a few minutes to reestablish the rapport before you dive into the work, it actually drives up the productivity.
Yeah, and I'll give an example of this. Working with a leader at Procter & Gamble, a dear friend, I saw her do something that I thought was remarkable and would perhaps provide even more solutions in answer to that important question. This was pre-COVID, so we were actually in person, but I think you could replicate this virtually. The individual leading the meeting, there was the chit chat, there was talk, what did you do for the weekend and so on and so forth. And then the person who's leading the meeting made the comment, okay, let's get down to business. And the leader I'm referencing, her first name's Kim, she said, time out. She said, actually, that conversation is our business. She said, yeah, we need to talk about our plan. Yes, we need to, address the numbers and so forth, but we'll only do it effectively. We'll do it more effectively when we actually have the relational component as well. And so she sent a clear signal to the person running that meeting that was equally valuable. It is our business as leaders to ensure that human connection. And so in summary, go ahead, Sean, did you have another thought on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. As I said, you get insights into people's lives, and then you understand that, if you schedule a 10 o'clock meeting with your colleagues in the UK and they've got a young family, they're just back from the school run, and often they've just, or they've just been sending their kids up from school. And often just that couple of minutes firstly allows them to change gears, because as human beings, we don't just flick a switch and we're on subject. It's not that easy. And also you get a gauge on, sometimes people are they are distracted, or they're trying to get their kids settled down for homeschooling. So, and then you say, how are you set now? Are you okay to move on to the subject? It's actually very respectful. And people might say, yeah. And it's almost like that's actually a transition, if you like, from whatever was happening to getting down to business, as you said, Craig, which is having in this environment. I think that's an important part, is transitioning from whatever was before to what we're about to discuss, so that when we're ready, when we start the discussion, we're actually ready to start the discussion.
Fabulous. I'll offer then one other piece here that our facilitators share with our clients. So I'm sure several of the folks in this huddle have perhaps been coached on this. We call it a platform statement. It has 3 components: set context. So for example, hey, it's been 2 weeks since we've met as a team. The second step is when we see leaders miss. Sean's modeling it right now. And it's this idea of validating the realities of others, validating your reality. So it could be a statement such as, I know most of us have not been able to get back to the office at the speed we want to, or that there's tension getting back to the office, or I understand we're behind our target milestone in this project and you're working extremely hard. That empathy portion that Sean is emphasizing is so critical. And then the third component in the platform statement is sharing our truth. And oftentimes people share this in the hallway or in a text, but we encourage it with the team. And that is, I'm missing the human connections. I know we'll execute more effectively when we have stronger relationships of trust. Those 3 components: set context, validate the reality of others, share your truth, your reality, sets the stage for that human transparency and authenticity that, of course, drive relationships. All right, Cheryl, let's keep rocking. Other questions from our network?
Yeah, we did just get another one that wants to remain anonymous. The question is, what do you do when you know members of your team have competing priorities? How do you get them to prioritize your plan or project?
Sean, I look forward to hearing this one. This is a burning issue for a lot of leaders, myself included. What do you got?
Yeah, it's a perennial challenge in business, right? Because we're all ambitious, and there's always more opportunities than we can go after. I think one of the interesting things I've experienced at PepsiCo is they really run we have these climate surveys and employee confidence index, which we run, and they actually give you really valuable feedback around how you're doing as a leader. And I would say the thing that comes back most clearly around setting priorities is the leader's ability to simplify, to set clear direction, and to be able to take decisions. And I think we underestimate sometimes when it comes to priorities. The first thing I always go to is, if we've got a lot of competing priorities, we need to simplify. We need to take a step back and say, what are we really trying to achieve here? What is our strategy? then which of these priorities has the greatest leverage on that strategy? And also, once you get to the point where you see, and then having that discussion with the team, saying, if we're going to maximize our leverage on the strategy through these priorities, where do we see that we're running? Where do we see the red line? And then you've got to change gears and say, okay, now let's change the gears from, how do we maximize our leverage on the strategy to how do we manage the implications of shutting down these priorities? How do we actually make sure that the resources do move away from these to where there is? So it comes back to that simplifying, providing clear direction, but also being very clear on the decisions and the consequences of the decisions that you're taking. And often I think when we set priorities, we don't always lock the decisions in and make sure that they land. And so I think that's one of the most important things, is when a decision's made, you need to make sure it's implemented. Otherwise, the question on priorities just keeps coming back, because priorities are like zombies, right? You've got to take them down, the ones that you've decided to stop. Otherwise, they just keep coming back.
Sean, I've got a follow-up question on that. You mentioned the consequences of our decisions. With a lot of our clients, we're talking about, the fact that our work ethic has gotten us here as leaders. But at this point, pretty much any successful professional has a great work ethic. And so the differentiating factor is now this simplicity ethic. And everything you just walked through is the essence of how we've defined it, what it means to have a simplicity ethic. I got a follow-up for you then. I'm really curious, when you said the consequences of our decision, do you ever unwrap that to the point with your teams? You're actually saying, hey, what happens if we don't succeed here, or we don't execute? Or do you simply just focus on the outcomes when we do execute?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Craig.
Yeah, I don't know if I understand it either. I'm joking. What I want to know is do you ever take the time to explore with the team the consequences of not executing for the organization, for the customer, the fallout, right? If we don't follow through with the decision we just made, what are the penalties? I'll use that word, right? And I'm not talking per individual. Of course, we wouldn't do that publicly. But do you ever have that conversation?
Yeah, well, I think that's a key part of taking decisions, right? And I think it's actually at the beginning of a decision. There's 3 stages to a decision, right? One is preparing the decision, one is taking the decision, and the other is implementing the decision. And I actually think the question that you're asking, Craig, happens in that first part of preparing the decision. And so when I work with teams and we face these kinds of questions, we always, one of the things is we ask the team to prepare the decision. What is the situation? What's the complications? What's your recommendation? And then, what is it going to take to implement? What are the consequences of this decision? And, I find weak decision-making practices when people say, well, we need a decision. And then you say, well, okay, but help me out here. What are we really talking about? And so I think, thinking about decisions in those 3 phases means that, when you actually come together to make a decision, you become much more effective, because you're not trying to synthesize a decision in the moment. You've actually working with the project team to help them curate, if you like, the decision. And then once you've made a decision, then you ask the team the question, now that we've taken the decision, how do we implement this decision? What happens next? Who talks to whom? And what actions need to be taken? And what consequences have we just bought into by taking that decision? And so that follow through, I think, also is part of what you're saying, Craig, which is every decision should be consequential. If you ignore the consequences, that's when the decision can unravel.
Yeah, I think running parallel to that, Sean, that's really useful. Those 3 stages of the decision, those steps. One of the things that I think has also been useful is ensuring that we are with our teams, facilitating the awareness and the actions people will take when they have conflicting priorities. So and I'd like to know from you, Sean, where does that fit in the course of a meeting, in the course of making a decision, where we actually say, all right, here we go, we're about ready to execute, but wait, when we encounter conflicting priorities, when we're not together, when we're out there, so to speak, what is our course of action? What will we do when we encounter conflicting priorities. Sean, do you do anything similar on that? If so, what has been the response? Where do you weave that in?
Yeah, we're actually in the middle of a change program at the moment, because we recognize coming into this whole pandemic that we were a pretty classical company, right? Divisions, functions, layers of control, and so on. And we've recognized that that just doesn't work in this environment as well as we'd like to. And when we look at companies which have really are much further advanced than PepsiCo on their digital transformation, what you see is those companies have moved from a command and control organization to what General Stanley McChrystal calls a team of teams, if anyone's read that and look at those principles. And again, it comes back, I think, Craig, to like this aspect of setting context and creating this environment where teams have got empowerment. Like, you can't empower a team. What you can do is create an environment where teams are empowered. And teams are actually very good at solving problems. And if you do that well, if you create that environment where teams feel that they're actually supported in what they're asked to do, and you provide context, I find it's much easier to address those competing priorities, because there's, if you like, the problem solving is not up to the leaders anymore. It's up to project teams to solve them. And a project team has much more intellect than a leader does. And they can generally come up with better solutions on how to manage that. At the end, where you can play a role as a leader is coming back to that, have you set the context? Are you simplifying things for the people you're working with? And when needed, providing direction, and in many ways giving teams permission in solving the problem to make those trade-offs, and then working with them to implement them. So, I think it's this shift from, I think that's going to be a big impact of the pandemic, where I think organizations are going to realize that some of the traditional, as I said, hierarchical command and control organizations are not going to work as well in this new environment. And so, it's how do you create that environment of empowerment that allows project teams to solve the problems more independently?
Sean, I couldn't agree more. I absolutely could not agree more with you 100% on that. Sherilyn, I've got one more question for Sean before we begin to wrap things up here, but I do want to honor our network. Is there another question from our network? I defer to them if there were, or if there is.
No, I think we're good to go to wrap this up. We do have 6 minutes left in our time today.
Then very quickly, Sean, I've got one more question for you. What have you learned as a leader? You talk about leading through a keyhole. I mean, if you were to summarize perhaps or clarify how you've grown as a leader during this extraordinary time, and what do you want to maintain and focus on and build even more as leader moving forward?
Yeah, I think what I've learned is what we perhaps took for granted, when you're in the office. And I think what I've learned is that, culture is something that actually exists in all those moments when we interact together, and it is much richer when we're together in person. And so if you're really focused on building a winning culture in this environment, you've got to have patience. Like, we're talking earlier about the meetings, let's get down to business. You've got to have the patience to build that rapport, to build that shared understanding, and you've got to be prepared to make a lot of investment to establish that. Because if you don't build that shared understanding, if you don't anchor everybody on the why, you can't solve the what and the how questions. So I would say the biggest learning I've had is, this patience where often I want to push on, but again, reading the Zoom, recognizing that everyone's not ready to move on, there's no point. So be patient, build the context, and have confidence, if you like, in the process, that if you build that, the rest of it's going to come much easier.
I appreciate your honesty, and as always, Sean, your transparency. Typically, these huddles are the fastest 50 minutes in the history of humankind. This one's been quick as well. A few final thoughts, but before we wrap up, as most of you know, if you've been in previous huddles, we're going to finish with your insight in an instant, where everybody participates. We'll hear from Sherilyn, hers, I'll share mine, and then we'll finish with Sean's. First, though, a reminder, our virtual Pathways Leadership Program, very similar to the conversations you're hearing now, and equipping leaders around the world with the tools and methods to align collaborative teams. Excited that we've seen the tremendous growth in that program through the COVID stretch, and looking forward to serving the market even more with that. We've got a special list of resources here. You can see them on the screen in front of you, both YouTube videos, of course, the book Do Big Things, and of course, check out PepsiCo. I've been nothing but impressed with Sean's work in terms of that triple bottom line that we heard referenced earlier. And so make sure you visit their website as well, follow what they're doing. Our next guest on the Collaborative Leaders Huddle is a special human being as well. Simon Yiannopoulos. There, I got it right, Yiannopoulos. He coached me on that. Simon Yiannopoulos, Senior Director of Supply Chain Management. Right now, as we all know, through this COVID stretch, supply chains in disarray. It's been a real challenge for organizations. This will certainly be a special discussion as well around how do you manage those conflicts, that disruption in a very volatile world. That's on November 2nd, 8 a.m. Mountain Time. Looking forward to having you join us then as well. And so let's go with our insights in an instant. Sherilyn Jane, what's been the most profound insight? And by the way, everyone, as she's doing that, please share yours in the chat space. What was your biggest aha? What was the biggest reminder? What do you walk away with that will be valuable for those to whom you're responsible? Sherilyn, your insight in an instant.
Yeah, it's the first couple things that Sean said today was, the reading the Zoom, that's so catchy. That's something that, everyone's going to be able to remember after this. And then leading through the Keyhole, just, we get a small glimpse of what everyone is going through just with their background, but we honestly don't know, what the rest of their situation looks like. And it's just so helpful to remember that and to just be mindful of that moving forward.
Yeah, thank you, Sherilyn. Being mindful of that will certainly prove valuable. My insight in an instant actually came from Aaron. Aaron, thank you for speaking up along with our other collaborative leaders. That idea that through the Keyhole, it actually amplifies what we see, and how important it is to ensure that as we transition back to the office or to a new way of working, that we're building on strengths that we've been building through this period. Aaron, really appreciate that. I'll be applying that moving forward. Sean, your insight in an instant.
Yeah, it's been a valuable discussion for me too. And it's, you think as you talk, and I think my insight in the instant would be that, all the people I work with have a tremendous amount of potential to contribute to what we're trying to achieve. And what I've learned in looking through the Keyhole is just understanding that person, where they're at, what their current experience is, and how that is impacting their ability to bring their full potential to whatever problem we're tackling it. And in a way, that concept of looking through the Keyhole also gives you that focus to see that person for where they are and what they are, so that you can understand better, how do I help this person bring their full potential to the problem? And in that sense, that could be a real positive out of working through this environment.
Well put, Sean. And I'll share transparently with our network here. This has been a bit of a dream. I told Sean this. I've known him for many years, and now everyone here has had an opportunity to see who he is, his character, the depth in his leadership. And that's why this has been a bit of a dream come true for me. So Sean, thank you from a personal level,
Welcome.
as well as on behalf of our network, for joining us and answering that question. How do we lead change during this incredible volatile time? Sean, be well, thank you. And reminder everyone, your leadership matters, but ultimately only teams deliver. Thanks for leading forward, everyone. We'll see you in the next Collaborative Leaders Huddle.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.